get out of bed. Thank you all for coming. A man went to the doctor for a checkup. He was told that he had a heart murmur. I've always had a heart murmur, he protested. Yes, replied the doctor, but now the murmur seems to have started humming. Ooh. He replied, that doesn't sound good. He started to get a little worried. So he tried to inject a little humor into the situation. He asked the doctor, what is it humming? I'm not sure, replied the doctor, but I think it's nearer my God to thee. That has absolutely nothing to do with today's gospel, but Aunt Testa always likes a joke in this sermon. Now on to today's gospel. I don't know about you, but if I were the president of a company and two of my employees came up to me, took me aside and said, here's the deal. We want you to make it happen. Me and my brother here, we want to be co-presidents of the organization. I'll sit on one side of you, he'll sit on the other side, and the three of us together will call all the shots. We'll all be number one. Now do it. If I were the president, my first reaction would be to free up these guys' future very fast. That's what we call it at the hospital. We never fire anybody for not doing their job. We help them free up their future. This is exactly what happens in today's gospel between Jesus, James, and John. Except Jesus, because he's Jesus and not me, takes a different approach. We're in year B right now, so most of the gospel readings this year have been from Mark. But if this was year A, we'd be reading from Matthew. And in the Matthew version of this story, it's an even more incredible account, because in Matthew's version, it's not James and John who confront Jesus, it's their mother. Their mother actually goes up to Jesus and tells him to make her sons co-partners in his group. Now these are the boys that Jesus himself nicknamed Boanerges, the sons of thunder, because of their fiery personalities and their impetuous tempers. And here's their mother looking to get them moved further up the corporate ladder. So I guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. It's interesting that John and James's request comes right after Jesus tells his disciples that he's going to be mocked, spit on, flogged, and killed. Maybe they figured that if Jesus was right, if he wasn't going to be around much longer, they better get into higher places of authority so that they can take over when he's gone. This whole story points to the contrast between who Jesus was and what they, his closest friends and companions, really wanted him to be. Biblical scholar Ralph Earl puts it this way. While Jesus was thinking of a cross, James and John were thinking of crowns. Jesus' burden was matched by their blindness, and his sacrifice by their selfishness. Jesus wanted only to give. They wanted only to get. Jesus' motive was pure service. Theirs was pure self-satisfaction. So Jesus responds to their request by asking them a question. Can you drink the cup I drink, or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with? And here this word is interesting that it comes to us as baptism. It actually means submerged or immersed. So Jesus is asking them if they would be able to be submerged or covered in the same suffering that he's going to endure. Put it another way, and this could be directed to each one of us today, can we submit to the suffering and agony of a selfless life? Can we bear up under intense pain? Will we endure unfair treatment and humiliation for Christ's sake? And of course, we know the end of the story. We know through Acts and Revelations that eventually James and John were able to do that. In Acts 12, we're told that Herod slaughtered James with a sword. And in Revelations 1, verse 9, John records the sufferings that he experienced while he was in exile. But right now, it's a different story. Jesus' reply sidetracks their ambitions. When When I was growing up, there was a lot of emphasis in my family around achieving, especially in school. My parents wanted us to have opportunities that they didn't have. Part of achieving their dreams for us was hard work and being number one. Unfortunately, I was always number 4 in my grade. Now, given that there were 3 classes for each grade, and each class had 50 children in it, yes, I went to a Catholic school, each class was taught by a nun, and every class had 50 children in it. We all sat in one classroom all day long with one teacher, no assistant teachers, no aides, and we all learned. And I got a very good education for $10 a month. So there were 150 kids in my grade, and I was number 4, but that still wasn't good enough. The message that came across all the time was that I had to be number 1. I had to be the best. I had to be in a place where people would notice me so I could get the best opportunities. But try as I might, I can never do it. Michael N., Stephen L., and John D. were always numbers 1, 2, and 3. And I was always, right up until graduation, number 4. In high school, it was worse. Out of 250 kids in my grade, I was number 10. But fortunately, in college, well, I was having too much fun in college, so I didn't care. But still, deep down, I always felt like I had to do better. Like I had to get ahead of whoever was already ahead of me. And if I didn't, I was going to be a failure, and I was going to disappoint someone. And I carried that burden for a long time. It was so ingrained in me that I didn't even know I was doing it half the time. Until one day, as a young brother, I was driving one of our older brothers to a doctor's appointment, weaving in and out of traffic like a nut, trying to get in front of all 500,000 cars ahead of me. And he calmly said to me, "You know, Rick, you can't always be first. There is always going to be somebody ahead of you." And when I realized for the first time that being first was not only unnecessary, but absolutely impossible. And just like that, and I'm not exaggerating, you know when you have a breakthrough, it just flows through you and you have this amazing moment of aha. Just like that, I stopped driving like a nut, literally and figuratively, both in the car, and those of you who have been with me know how I drive now, so you can imagine how I used to drive. And in my personal and spiritual life. And that's when I decided to direct all that energy into other more meaningful and more life-giving things. Well, that's the good news for today. Jesus is telling us that we don't have to strive to be number 1 or to be great by conforming to the pressures of our society. Our culture tells us that it's important to be great or famous or rich because those things give us power and authority and notoriety. Yet Jesus is telling us the exact opposite, that power and authority comes not from being number 1, not from being in a place where we have everything, and everyone wants to serve us, but from putting ourselves in a place where we have little or nothing, and we serve others. Jesus' message is countercultural, and that's why he was killed. He upsets the status quo with his actions and his ideas and his words, because he preached the exact opposite of what people were duped into believing by their society and their culture. And everything he said 2,000 years ago still applies to us today. Here are his 2 favorite disciples, John and James, falling into the same trap 2,000 years ago that so many of us still get snared in today. They do represent us. Think about this. When Jesus entered Jerusalem in triumph, a few days before his death, he rode a lowly donkey, not a fancy stallion. Think about what we drive. When Jesus visited friends, he stayed in their humble homes, not in some fancy inn. How many stars does a hotel have to have on Yelp before we consider making a reservation? Whenever Jesus gave food to the hungry, or when he visited the sick, when he performed miracles, he fled from the crowds that wanted to make him their king. When's the last time we performed an act of kindness even though we knew nobody was looking? Jesus didn't just wash people's souls clean of sin. He knelt beside them and washed their feet of dust and dirt. He sat and ate with sinners and those who were rejected by society. What did I do on my last vacation, on my way to that expensive dinner and a show, when the homeless person asked me for loose change? Not once did Jesus ever complain that no one appreciated him. He never opened his mouth when he was reviled and persecuted. What's the last thing we complained about in our lives? These are the things to think about when we prioritize our lives. What is worthwhile and who is worthy of respect. What jobs or positions are beneath our dignity. What insults should be tolerated. What is right, what is wrong. Which seeds should be watered, and which ones should not. Remember James and John, and think about how we are like them in so many ways. And then remember Jesus' invitation to become more like him in our words and our actions, or as he puts it in another gospel story, to become more childlike, more simple, more innocent, less judgmental, less full of ourselves. I'd like to close with a Native American story that puts all of this into perspective. There was once a great chief who was very proud. One day he was walking through his village boasting, "I am truly great, there is no one greater than me." Just then an old woman came up to the chief and said, "I know one who is truly greater." At first the chief was surprised and then angry. "What? Who is this great one? There is no one greater than me." The old woman said, "Come to my house tomorrow when the sun is at the highest point in the sky, and I will introduce you to this great one." The chief replied, "Very well, I will be there and we shall see who is the greatest." The chief went home and slept soundly that night in order to have all his strength the next day. In the morning he prepared himself carefully and put on his finest clothing. As he did, he reminded himself of all the great things he had done and all the great things he could do. He looked around at all the gold trinkets and possessions that he had around him. "There is no one greater than me," he repeated to himself as he walked over to the old woman's house. When he reached the house, he called out, "Old woman, I am here. It is time. Where is this great chief you say is greater than I?" Come in, the old woman called. When the chief entered the old woman's house, he saw her sitting against the wall with a baby crawling on the floor beside her. The chief looked around. There was no one else there. "Where is this great chieftain you told me about yesterday?" he asked. The old woman motioned toward the baby. "This is the great one I told you about." The great chief was not amused. He raised his voice angrily at the old woman and shook his finger at her. "What do you mean? Don't try to trick me. This is just a baby. Where is the great chief?" The baby became frightened by the sudden loud noise and angry voice, and he started to cry, and the great chief became flustered. He didn't mean to make the baby cry. He forgot about his anger, and he got down on his hands and knees. He pulled his eagle and hawk feathers from his hair and brushed the baby's cheeks with them. He pulled off his medicine bags and held them under the baby's nose. He pulled off his necklaces and jingled them in the baby's ears. And gradually the baby stopped crying and began to listen and watch. The old woman smiled and said, "You see, even you, the great chief, had to stop being great so you could take care of the baby. In any home, in any village, it's the smallest and most insignificant who is truly great. Because even the greatest and most powerful must become his servant." This is how the Creator planned it. Creator didn't give you riches or power or authority so you could boast about your possessions and your greatness. The Creator made you great so that you could help others who are not as strong as you. That was the day that the great chief learned to be even greater. And to that, brothers and sisters, I say,